Welcome to the episode of Physical Education. Friends, today in this episode, I will be talking about one of the new topic, that is football. In this episode, we will be discussing about the history of football. Football is of incredible importance to the English public and has an important place within English national life. The sport is almost always referred to simply as football. It is unusual for it to be called soccer, and it is only referred to as association football in very limited circumstances. Kicking ball games are described in England since at least 1280. England can boast the earliest ever documented use of the English word football in 1409, and the earliest reference to the football in French is 1314. An account of an exclusive kicking ball game from Nottinghamshire in the 15th century bears similarity to football. There is good evidence for referred team football games being played in English public schools since 1581. The modern global game of football was first codified in 1863 in London by the English Football Association, the oldest football association in the world. The modern passing game is believed to have been involved in London in the early 1870s. England is home to the oldest association football clubs in the world, dating from at least 1857, the world's oldest competition. The FA Cup, founded in 1871, and the first ever football league in 1888. For these reasons, England is considered the home of the game of football. Now, let us start with the history of football. Football, or soccer, as the game is called in some parts of the world, has a long history. Football, in its current form, arose in England in the middle of the 19th century. But alternative versions of the game existed much earlier and are a part of the football history. In China, under the 3rd and 2nd century BC, a game named Kuju was played. Other earlier variants of the game had been known from the ancient Greece. At this stage, the ball was made by shreds of leather filled with air. The first documents of balls filled with air are from the 7th century. The most admitted story tells that the game was developed in England under the 12th century. In this century, games that reminded of football were played on meadows and roads in England. Besides, from kicks, the game involved also punches of the ball with the fist. This early form of football was also much more rough and more violent than the modern way of playing. This would also be one of the reasons for the game to be forbidden in several centuries. But the football-like games would appear again in the streets of London in the 17th century. It took, however, long time until the features of today's football had been taken into practice. For a long time, it was no clear distinction between football and rugby. There were also many variations concerning the size of the ball, the number of players, and the length of a match. The game was often played in schools, and two of the predominant schools were Rugby and Eton. At Rugby, the rules included the possibility to take up the ball with the hands. And the game we today know as rugby has its origin from here. At Eton, on the other hand, the ball was played exclusively with the feet and can therefore be seen as a close predecessor to the modern football. The game in rugby was called the running game, while the game in Eton was called the dribbling game. Proper rules for the game were decided at a meeting in Cambridge in 1848. Another important event in the history of football come about in 1863. Then, the first football association was formed in England. This also led to a standardization of the size and weight of the ball. As with many things in history, women was for a long time excluded from participating in games. It was not before the late 19th century that also women started to play football. Though football was considered a male sport, it was not exclusively played by men. Women have been involved in the game since the late 19th century. It became increasingly popular during World War I when women had taken on their jobs traditionally done by men. Those in industrial labor regularly met to play. A ladies' team from Preston was one of the first to compete in an international game against Paris. There was a brief ban after World War I made by the Football Association, who deemed women's football to be inappropriate. However, the formation of the English Women's FA saw the ban eventually lifted in 1971. Since then, women's football has continued to grow in Britain and abroad. Some of the largest football clubs, such as Arsenal, Everton, and Chelsea, all have female teams which compete at home and internationally. Football has become a much loved part of British culture and has been instrumental in causing change. Possibly, the strangest match took place during World War I, a period of history epitomized by bloodshed and death on massive scales. On Christmas Eve of 1914, upon hearing German troops singing carols, both sides walked on to no man's land and played a game of football. While it is not known who won that day, this was to be the only time in the trenches where artillery fire ceased. The Christmas Day Truce of 1914, as it became known, highlights the impact football has had in this country and indeed the world, and helps explain why it is the nation's favorite pastime. The first competitions. Other milestones were now to follow. Football Association Challenge Cup, FA Cup, was first run in 1871. The next year was the first match between two national teams played for the first time. The match was between England and Scotland, ended 0-0 and was followed by 4,000 people at Hamilton Crescent. This is a picture which shows illustration from this occasion. The first international tournament occurred in 1883 and included 4 national teams: England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. The football was in a long time a British concern and it gradually spread to other European countries. The first game that took place outside Europe occurred in Argentina in 1867, but it was foreign British workers who were involved and not Argentinian citizens. The Federation Internationale de Football Association, that is FIFA, was founded 1904 and a foundation act was signed by representatives from France, Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, Spain, Sweden and Switzerland. The first football clubs. Football clubs have existed since the 15th century, but unorganized and without official status. It is therefore hard to decide which the first football club was. Some historians suggest that it was the Football Club, formed 1824 in Edinburgh. Earlier, clubs were often formed by former school students, and the first of this kind was formed in Sheffield in 1855. The oldest among professional football clubs is the English club, Notts County, that was formed in 1862 and still exists today. In 1985, professional football was legalized, and 3 years later, the Football League was established. In the first season, 12 clubs were joining the league, but soon more clubs become interested and the competition would consequently expand into more divisions. Black players. As in many other sports, the white male were predominant for a long time. In football, black players was present relatively early and in comparison with, for example, tennis, football has traditionally been known as a sport with a mix of black and white players. In Britain, Andrew Watson is known to be the first black player, and he played in the Scottish club Queen's Park in the 1880s. A game of passion. Few other sports show examples of passion to that extent as football. The arenas are flocked by cheering people, and in front of television even more are watching carefully and sometimes with great enthusiasm. Already in the late 19th century, Goodison Park was built in England in purpose of football games. In 1894, FA Cup final between Notts County and Bolton Wanderers was attended by 37,000 people. A milestone in football stadiums is the construction of Maracana Stadium. In the year of 1950, the imposing stadium in Rio de Janeiro was ready for almost 2 lakh people. No other sports have been built stadiums of that capacity. The great modern competitions, no other sports event besides the Olympic Games can today measure itself with the World Cup FIFA. The first edition of the FIFA World Cup was played 1930 in Uruguay and has since been returned every 4th year with 2 exceptions due to the Second World War. In the 1991, the first World Cup for women was held in China and had since then also returned every 4th year. Today, the biggest global tournament for clubs is the Champions League, played since 1992, the former European Cup 1960 to 1992, globalization of the biggest sport in the world. In the late 19th century, only a few national football teams existed. England and Scotland had the first active teams which playing games against each other in the 1870s. Today, there are 211 national associations. Included in the Federation Internationale de Football Association, again FIFA, the world governing body of the sport. Another proof of the globalization could be seen in the increase of nations qualifying for the World Cup from 32 in 1934 to over 200 in 2014. The world regions have been divided into 6 confederations. Confederation Africaine de Football (CAF), Asian Football Confederation (AFC), Union des Associations Européennes de Football (UEFA), the Confederation of North Central America and Caribbean Association Football, that is CONCACAF, Oceania Football Confederation OFC, and Confederation Sudamericana de Football, that is CONMEBOL, the name of the game. Now let us have a look how the name of the game is football or soccer. In most parts of the world, football is used as the name for the chess of the green pitch, the biggest sports in the world. In the United States and Canada, however, soccer is used instead as a distinction from American football. A more formal name sometimes used is association football, but in popular speech it is either football or soccer. History of football in India. What is the history of football in India? How it started in India? Football is one of the most popular sports in India. The game is played extensively in the country with the maximum fan following in Goa, Kerala, West Bengal, Mizoram, Manipur and Sikkim. In the rest of the states, it is next to cricket in terms of popularity. All the international league matches and the Soccer World Cup are keenly watched by the sports enthusiasts in the subcontinent. The game holds a rich tradition in India, its history being something that deserves special mention. Go through the following lines to get information on the history of football in India. The history of football in India can be traced back to the pre-independent period when the British people brought the game to the subcontinent. The initial football matches were played between army teams. A number of football clubs in India were soon created during the British Empire. In fact, these clubs predate the most renowned clubs and organizations of football such as FIFA. In India, the first football game was organized between Calcutta Club of Civilians and the Gentlemen of Barrackpur. In 1854, the first football club of India, named Calcutta FC, was founded in 1872. Dalhousie Club, Traders Club and Naval Volunteers Club were also established in the following years. The first tournament, Calcutta, which is presently known as Kolkata, is considered the home of football in India. This is probably the reason why a number of football clubs originated from the state, including Mohun Bagan Athletic Club, later named as the National Club of India, which came into existence in 1889. After a few years, the Indian Football Association (IFA) came into existence in 1893. In 1898, the oldest football tournament in India, the third oldest in the world, was commenced in Shimla. Referred to as the Durand Cup, the tournament was named after the Foreign Secretary of India, Sir Mortimer Durand, who inaugurated it. The first victory. The first victory of Indian footballers was registered in 1911 when Mohan Bagan club won the IFA Shield Trophy. The victory has secured a special place in the history of football in India because the trophy was previously won by the British teams based in India. Subsequently, the number of football clubs in India increases, which led to the formation of the All India Football Federation AIFF in 1937. In 1948, the AIFF was affiliated to FIFA, the international governing body for football. In 1954, AIFF became one of the founder members of the Asian Football Confederation, AFC. The Golden Period. The period stretching from 1951 to 1962 deserves special mention because it is the golden era in the history of Indian football, as the Indian football clubs put up commendable performances year after year. They qualified for a number of international competitions and competed overseas. The Indian footballers brought laurels to the homeland by winning gold medals in the 1951 and 1962 Asian Games held at New Delhi and Jakarta respectively. India registered another record in 1956 when they became the first Asian nation to take it to the Olympic football semi-finals in the 1956 Melbourne Olympics. Present day. The Indian football teams have performed reasonably well in the recent years, though the sport at the domestic level still needs upliftment. Some of the great performances have been witnessed at the Nehru Cup held in August 2007 and the AFC Challenge Cup held in August 2008, both of being won by Indian football team. The national football team has qualified for 2011 Asian Cup to be held in Qatar, although the Indian football clubs have delivered consistent performances in the near past. The Indian football still team needs to mark its presence at the important international tournaments. Women football in India. Women's football in India was administered by the Women's Football Federation of India, WFFI, until early 1990s when the AIFF took over the administration of women's soccer in the country. Just like the men's game, the women's game had its early pioneers from the state of West Bengal. The women's club were started by East Bengal and Mohan Bagan clubs in 2000 and 2001 season. National championships for both senior and junior girls are also held. The majority of players in the Indian women national football teams are from Manipur and West Bengal. However, women's football in India has not gained as much popularity as the men's team have. So, while concluding, football is of incredible importance to not only to English people, but to most of the Asians too. England is the home to the oldest association football clubs in the world. It is one of the favorite game of the English people, and it has started long past. The importance of football is seen in at large number. It has important place within many countries, especially English national life. The sport is almost always referred to simply as football. It is unusual for it to be called soccer, and it is only referred to as association football in very limited circumstances. The name of this game is known in the countries as football or saucer. Hope this lecture has given you the enough knowledge about the history of football in our world. Thank you. Have a nice day.